evening's fireside. Welcome to this evening's fireside chat. We're delighted to have Captain Stan Spider Jones join us this evening. Your transition assistance team is here to serve you, and we have membership from profit, nonprofit, government, entrepreneurship, and academia. And so we have the members that volunteer their time, and our host is, he's gladly accepted our invitation to speak to you tonight. As far as the rules of engagement, we're trying a different format. So what I would ask is if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll unmute you and you can ask your question. But before we start, let me just introduce Captain Stan Spider Jones, good friend of mine. He's currently one of the test pilots at Gulfstream, who conducts ground and flight tests of newly designed aircraft and systems. He entered commission through Aviation Officer Candidate School of Pensacola in 1991 as a distinguished naval graduate and earned his wings in January of 1994. First squadron was the Wildcats of VFA 131, where he flew 2 deployments, combat operations, and joint Operation Joint Endeavor and Operation Southern Watch, with missions over Iraq and Bosnia. Following that, he went to United States Naval Test Pilot School, and he was assigned to VX-23 at Pax River, Maryland as a test pilot, and then later on went to return there as an instructor at the test pilot school. Command tours include VFA 94 in 2008, and then bonus command, which is our fleet replacement squadron, VFA 125 in 2009, and then went on as the chief, let's see if I can get this right, Chief Operations Test Director at VX9 in 2015, then later command the squadron. Short tours include Senior Fellow at the Chief of Staff in the Army Strategic Studies Group in Washington, D.C., and a Requirements Officer in the Pentagon for Air Warfare for F-18s. He's a graduate of the Air Command and Staff College, also Joint and Combined Warfare School at the Joint Forces Staff College. And he got his Master of Science from the National Resource, Master of Science in National Resource Strategy from National Defense University. And he's got a Master of Science Aviation Systems and a Bachelor's Industrial Engineering, both from the University of Tennessee. Spider has accumulated over 3,400 flight hours and 630 carrier arrested landings and flown 32 different aircraft types. Personal decorations include the Legion of Merit, 2 Defense Meritorious Service Medals, 3 Meritorious Service Medals, and 3 Strike Flight Air Medals. Please join me in welcoming Captain Stan Spider Jones.
All right. Thank you, Biscuit. Can you hear me all right? Thumbs up. I see you nodding. Okay. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. And hopefully you all will get something out of this, learn something, hopefully from, kind of my experiences and its value added. So in preparing to come do this and, the fireside chat concept, right? So I don't have a bunch of slides and things. I'm going to talk to some about just kind of who I am. Just kind of went through most of it. So I'm not sure what else there is to say. I'll make it real quick. I grew up an Army brat. My dad was Air Defense Artillery. And so his job was to shoot down airplanes. I went to school, University of Tennessee. I got an industrial engineering degree and I then went to work as an engineer. I did that for about a year and a half before I realized that that's not what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I felt like it was lacking in purpose and value. I was an athlete, played football at Tennessee. So not having that team of guys or women who are dedicated to the same thing that I am, who are willing to kind of, put their head down and charge through the adversity and fight for a common cause, that was lacking. So I got interested in flying airplanes. I'd never flown an airplane before I joined the Navy, but I did happen to live near an Air Force base where the Air Force did pilot training, and that was Columbus Air Force Base in Mississippi. So when I graduated from school in Tennessee, I went to work at a plant for the company that I worked for in Mississippi. My neighbors were all Air Force pilots in training. One of them invited me to fly a simulator, T-38. We did it for an hour, and that's when I knew what I needed to go do. But I knew that I needed to go Navy because I wanted to land on ships. So I thought. I had no idea. I just got lucky. I stumbled upon it. And so I quit, went to AOCS, got commissioned, like Biscuit said already, and did a tour with VFA 131, Pax River, department head of VFA 147, Joint Forces Command in Suffolk, first command of VFA 94, and then command of VFA 125, then to the Pentagon for F-18 requirements for the Director of Air Warfare, and then to the Strategic Studies Group, and then to National Defense Eisenhower School, and then to VX9, and I retired out of that job. And so I think today, what you want me to talk about, Biscuit, is kind of, how I kind of made the transition from leaving the Navy, what my thought process was, and how I decided to make that decision, and how I prepared myself, and kind of how it worked out, I guess the goods and others, so that people can learn from that. And so I'll start there. If you've got something, Biscuit, you think I need to kind of anchor on a little bit, feel free to, unmute yourself and speak up, and hey, kind of guide me that way if you want me to talk about something specific that I'm not touching upon. So when I left VX9 and made my decision to retire, my decision, quite honestly, was probably made before I got to VX9. And so having gone through the experience that I had when I first joined the Navy, and that was, kind of seeking satisfaction in the job that I was doing, I felt as if beyond VX9 for me as a pilot, I was pretty certain that the flying would end, unless I became, a CAG or an admiral. I wasn't going to become a CAG. My major command tour was VX9, so I wasn't going to get looked at again for CAG. I could potentially become, maybe a base CO or a test wing kind of guy and go that route. But my entire career, my primary interest was warfighting. And so even after I did my tour at the Navy Test Pilot School, where many of my classmates kind of took the off ramp and went into the acquisition world and became AEDOs, I went immediately back to the fleet because I wanted to be a fleet operator. And that happened probably about a month and a half before 9/11. And so got heavily involved with that, and spent a lot of time at sea like everybody else did after 9/11. I did a tour of Lemoore when that happened. And out of the 3 years that I was stationed there, I was deployed for 2 years and 2 months. And so when I left there, people asked me what I thought about it, and I really told them, I don't know, I wasn't really there. So looking to the transition piece then, knowing that, my last flying job would be at VX9, I knew going in that, this is probably going to be the last tour that I do. And then I'm going to go seek some other form of satisfaction in the work that I do. I'm a bit of a workaholic, and, I need purpose. And I did not want to spend any more time at the Pentagon. I had already done a couple of years there. It's a great experience to have done. I did not want to go back. And so that was not in the cards for me. I spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, what do I want to do? As a pilot, especially as a pilot who was current in the airplane at the time, and even now, it's a pretty easy transition if you want to go be an airline pilot, for example. I did not want to do that. I felt like it was lacking in purpose. It was the one thing that I knew I didn't want to do when I left the Navy. When people asked me, what are you going to do? And I would always say, I don't know, but I'm not going to be an airline pilot. Now, I suppose if nothing else worked out, that could have been my fallback plan, but I didn't need to go that route. And so I kicked around a few ideas. Okay, what might I want to do? I've flown in the Navy for 27 years. Uh, and outside that stint in Washington, D.C., most of it was in the cockpit. I've had 3 command tours. I feel pretty good about how it's gone. And I don't need to look back, and it was a good ride. And so I thought about consulting. Maybe that would allow me to get involved with a number of different things. Get on with maybe a consulting firm, go to Bain and Company or something like that. That might expose me to a number of different things, and then maybe take an off ramp out of there. If I came upon something that I really had an interest in. I obviously considered the defense industry. Seems to be a fairly easy transition for a lot of people. They are looking for people like us. And so, especially after leaving China Lake with a number of clearances, that I can't even talk about, that could open some doors. But again, I wasn't so sure that I wanted to go that path either. I didn't think I really did. Quite honestly, I didn't think it would be much fun. I don't think I'd enjoy it. And so I think one of the things that the first point that I'll make is that it's something that's a pretty common theme that most people who talk about transitioning, whether it's the ruling course or senior TAPS, I forget what it's called, executive TAPS course, they talk about networking. And I didn't really have, a well-defined kind of, organized network, but I had a network, right? Everybody here, some of you guys I haven't seen or talked to in years, but it's like, we just saw each other yesterday. But how my network worked for me was when I was about 1 year from retirement, I got a phone call from one of my Naval Test Pilot School classmates who I hadn't talked to in at least 10 years. But he called me out of the blue and said, hey, I heard you're going to retire. I said, yeah, I got about a year left. And he said, have you thought about Gulfstream? And I said, who? Don't they make those trailers? Or no, that's Airstream. This is Gulfstream. We make G6s and business jets. And I said, well, I've not thought about Gulfstream. He said, well, you should. And I said, okay, I will. Tell me about it. What do you think? And he starts describing this job to me. And then I got a phone call from the person who ultimately hired me at Gulfstream about 3 months later. And he said, we're about to post a job rec for 2 openings for production test pilots. And I talked to Charlie Gray. He was my GPS classmate who was already at Gulfstream. And he said, you're a good guy. And if you're interested, send me a resume. So the boss, my first boss, the guy that hired me, the chief production test pilot at the time, was a guy named Kurt Perry, Marine Harrier driver who transitioned from Cobras. Kurt, long story short, sent him a resume. He got it. Said, when can you interview? We interviewed on a Friday in Savannah, and I got a phone call on Monday morning saying, okay, you're about to hear from our HR department, and they're going to offer you some things, and it's a job offer. So I got that. So I suppose the one lesson learned there is, we hear it said all the time, who is important as well as what you know. Because at the end of the day, right, I probably would not have gone to them. But it was just a relationship that was built, and I didn't burn any bridges. Right. So, my advice would be don't burn any bridges, because you just never know who's going to reach out to you and offer you, for example, an opportunity like that. I looked a little bit at defense stuff early on. And oh, by the way, I only had one interview after I retired. And I actually got that interview before I retired. And I was hired in January and I retired in June. So I wish I had a little better story to tell you about some trials and tribulations and a whole bunch of lessons learned, but there's all kinds of ways, I guess, this transition can happen, and mine is one of them. And so it was smooth and easy. And quite honestly, it took a lot of stress off of me because I wasn't in the short hairs trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. It was a flying job that didn't involve flying customers. It was a company who's the leader of the business jet industry. And the people that I would work with, of all the test pilots there at the time, like I said, I started in production tests and moved over to experimental tests, given my test pilot school background, which became even much more interesting, by the way. But, between of the 50 or maybe 45 test pilots at Gulfstream, I'd say all but maybe one is an ex-military pilot. And so I kind of got to get back into a world that was much like the world that I'd left in terms of the quality of the people, shared interest, and a willingness to work and tackle common goals and solve problems and things like that. And so it's what has kept me here. The move over to developmental tests has made it even much more interesting because I fly right now. Primarily, the plane I fly more than anything else right now is the G700. It's an experimental airplane. Gulfstream hasn't even got a type certificate for it yet. We're not clear to sell it yet. So I'm doing the test flying to work its way through certification with the FAA and ultimately get a certificate of airworthiness so that Gulfstream can then start producing and selling and delivering these airplanes. Things that I think, steps that I took before this, or things that I was doing before the Gulfstream opportunity came along, I reached out to another person that I had known who had transitioned probably 3 years before me, maybe even 4. And he was a business capture kind of business development guy at Raytheon. And I reached to him and I just said, hey, I'm going to be retiring here. I've got to kind of put together a resume and I know I got to do all that stuff. And he said, yes. And, send me what you've got. Right. So another bit of advice I would give people is reach out to the people who have made the transition. I sent him my resume. He sent it back with recommendations, things to say, keywords that people were looking for and that sort of thing. And we went through probably 3 or 4 iterations of that, right? To kind of, he wasn't going to write it for me. He kind of gave me kind of some direction and I wrote it and he kind of chopped on it, if you will. And so that helped, I think, having somebody who had been through that process, who had done it, who was in the industry and was, understood how things worked. So that was very helpful. Prior to that, I'd say probably 2 years prior to my retirement, I started a LinkedIn profile. And it took me a while to kind of fill that in. And I went all the way back to, hey, I just graduated from college and put in every job that I had. I pulled out old fit reps, for my Navy jobs. I pulled out I had a resume from that first civilian job. And I started filling in the timeline from the time that I left college until the time that I was currently in the Navy. So that when it came time for me to build a resume, I kind of already had it done in terms of the information. I just had to kind of pick and choose off all the information. And it's all still there. If you want to look at my LinkedIn profile, you'll see it all there. I pulled pieces of that out based on the information and the recommendations that my friend was giving me about how to write a resume. And that's how I populated my resume. So I think it's worthwhile. Certainly a year out, I'd say probably 2 years out is better than a year out to start building a resume, because most of, a lot of what you've done is already done, right? So that's not going to change. You don't want to have to be rushing to kind of play catch up or barely meet the deadline, right? Because most of us don't do things really well when we're in a hurry. And the last thing you want to do is put something out there that isn't as good as it could be because you were in a hurry. So get on that, the resume piece, start building that early. Another thing that was important to me, and I got lucky again, because the VX9, I had 5 or 6 O5s on my staff, and they were non-command screen O5s. So when they didn't screen, they typically went on shore duty, CAG staff or something like that. And on the backside, they were fortunate enough to get a flying job at VX9 doing operational tests, because you don't have to be a test pilot school graduate to work at VX9. You do have to be one to command it, or at least you used to. So I had 4 or 5 guys, 05s, retire, who were working for me. That's when I knew I was old, when I got people who are subordinate to me that are retired, officers anyway. And so they had gone through the process, and I picked some of their brains. And the one thing that was really important, I think, was the medical side. And so we kind of developed kind of a gouge, some gouge within the squadron on that. And that was some really good advice that I got. And that was, don't wait until the last minute. While you're still in the service, when you're working through the VA and working through the medical stuff, you're a higher priority than somebody who got out a year ago who then decided to go through that process. I think the way it's changed now is they won't even let you start until 6 months prior. So my advice would be, on the day that you're allowed to start. And don't get behind the timeline there. I had a lady that worked in Point Mugu. Was it Point Mugu or Port Hueneme? I can't remember which one. But anyway, she was fabulous. And she kind of made it her mission to help each and every person that came to her through that process. And quite honestly, she wanted you to get as many benefits as you possibly could in terms of disability and whatnot. I took her my medical record, and she told me what I was going to fill out. We spent probably an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours in her office, and that's how we did it. And she just kind of walked me through it. And so when you do that, there's a website that you can track the progress of that. And as you are approaching your retirement, it kind of tells you, how many days it expects, and it kind of goes up and down. It can be a little nerve-wracking, but the day of my retirement was the day that I received my disability. And I had one of my 05 guys on my staff had the exact same experience. And he was the one that kind of gave me the gouge on who to talk to and how to work that. You need somebody to help you with that. You can't just read an instruction and figure it out. There's no way. So get that help. Go to the person wherever you are whose job it is to do that. And go to them before the day you should start. Go to them 3 months prior if you have to, and let them tell you, I need you to come back in 3 months. I can't do anything now. And then ask the questions. When I show up here in 3 months, what do I need to have with me? How do I get the best start to this process? Because if I had gotten out, or if I waited, say, 3 months prior to my getting out and then gone to her, she couldn't make the process go fast enough to have it happen on the day of my retirement. And the day that you retire, is what she told me, was, once that happens, nobody's in a hurry anymore to help you. And so another benefit of that was, and I was kind of betting on it, was I had taken a job and moved and bought a house. So I retired on June 1st. I got my VA disability on June 1st, and I closed on my house on June 4th, which, because I had some amount of disability, saved me the VA funding fee at that time, which amounted to me for $16,000. And so that's another good reason why you need to get on top of that, because you're probably going to move, and you may very well be buying a home. And so if you're going to buy a new home after you get out, wait till after you get some kind of disability. I'm not sure how sustainable it is, but they seem to be throwing disability at everybody. And so I suspect that, unless you're Superman or Superwoman, you're going to have something. And if you have any amount, it could be, I think there's such a thing as 0% disability. I don't know what that really means, other than you don't have much going on, but you've got some amount of disability. And that's all it takes. It can be 5% or 2% to, for example, waive a VA funding fee if you use the VA to buy a home. And the VA has upped their limits to basically whatever it is your credit score says you can handle. And so that can be a pretty good chunk of change. So those were kind of the big things. I did the ruling course, like I said, the executive TAPs. The things that I got out of those courses, quite honestly, more than anything else, ruling course was pretty good for resume building. understanding LinkedIn profiles and things like that. Probably the executive TAT class. Probably the most important thing I got out of that was benefits and how to go about that, to be honest with you. I think that was a 2-day evolution. And really, we got about 2 hours of the benefits piece, and that was the part that I found to be most useful. We got that like in the last 2 hours of the last day. So pay attention there, take good notes on the benefits piece. It's important. Medical is another issue. Medical, dental, vision when you get out. So I work at Gulfstream Aerospace. Most companies have some sort of medical, dental, vision plan that you can pay. They'll take it out of your check, and you can do it that way. Like I said, most of the pilots here, with the exception of a couple, were all ex-military. And what most of us have done, except for maybe 1 or 2 people, I think Kirk, the guy that hired me, a little older, I think recently gave up TRICARE. But most of us stick with TRICARE, and then we use the company's vision and dental. And that works really good for us. So it works for me, it works for my family. And Gulfstream actually used to give you money back if you didn't use their medical, because, quite honestly, they're not making any money by covering anybody for medical. So it's one less expense that they have. They would give us money back for not using it. So you're going to have to think about that when you make the transition. Life insurance, something, right? How do you protect yourself and your interests of yourself and your family and things like that? And so, and then what's it called? Surface life.
SVP.
Yeah. Went back and forth on that one. Again, that's a decision for each and everyone. Everybody's got their own individual needs and desires. We chose to do it. Peace of mind, if nothing else. And so, just do it from the get-go and you won't miss it, right? And so that's another kind of safety net, if you will.
Hey, Spider, can I
Yes, sir.
Just to kind of anchor on that a little bit. So for a survivor benefits plan, once you say no, that's forever.
Yes.
If you say yes, you can then change it and drop it later. But if you say no at, retirement in your paperwork, then that's gone.
Yeah. Right. So think hard and long on that one, because like you said, it's the final answer. And I think maybe even up to 3 years or something. 2 years. Okay. I remember that notification coming and going. It didn't matter to me, but you can back out, but you can't back in if you said no the first time.
Yeah, and Spider, it's Tony Barnes. And a little more clarification is, as a service member, when it comes to survivor benefit, you don't have the authority to say yes or no. It has to be signed off by your spouse.
That's right. So you're not going to pull something like that without, without bringing in your significant other. Yeah, if you do say no, you're exactly right. She's got to say, acknowledge that he said no.
Hey, Spider, can I ask you a few questions to, maybe pull in some of the attendees?
Yeah.
So you talked about some of the resources that you utilized and your networking and the medical. Can you kind of discuss, because it's one thing to get the job. Did you talk to anybody about the compensation outside of the company? And then if you would discuss any pitfalls that you either experienced or avoided?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. So I did talk about compensation. Gulfstream is, like I said, it's the flight department, because we're all ex-military guys for the most part. It's somewhat military-like, right? And they kind of have a pay structure. And I spoke with people. So what I learned is after I started talking to Gulfstream, I learned that, hey, Matt Finney? Yeah, I remember Matt Finney. Yeah, he works at Gulfstream. Oh, I didn't know Matt Finney was there. Hey, Kevin Claffey? Sure do. Yep, he works at Gulfstream. Hey, Eric Holmberg? Yeah, I was at Pax River with Eric. Yeah, he's been at Gulfstream for 6 years. you know Charlie Gray, right? I said, yeah, I know Charlie. He's the guy that first called me. Yeah, well, you know, he's still there as well. I had enough people that I knew personally that I could talk to, that, you know, I could talk about that with, right? Kind of a close enough circle of friends that, you know, we can talk money, and not feel like we're digging too deeply into somebody's personal business. So I had a pretty good idea of where I would start. And I was satisfied with that. Um, Now, when it comes to negotiating, so I didn't negotiate the salary. They made me an offer money wise, and I liked it, and I took the money. Um, but they had a moving assistance, for example, where if you sell a home, they pay the closing costs, right? If you buy a home, they help you with the closing costs in buying a home, and those could be significant amount of money. And so, when you know it, the one and only time I ever lived on base was my very last tour in China Lake. And so we were, you know, we weren't living in a home that we owned. I did own a home still in Virginia Beach. And so what I negotiated was that, because initially they said, well, you don't own the home that you live in, so we can't, you know, cover your closing costs and all that stuff. You get kind of the renter's assistance plan, which is not as lucrative. I said, yes, but I own a home in Virginia Beach, and I need to sell that home to buy a home in Savannah. And oh, by the way, and them, you know, I'm dealing now with HR people, not with the people that I fly with every day. And my boss, the guy that's going to hire me though, is he's in the know of the conversations that we're having, because he's the one who extended the offer and he wants to know how it's going. And I explained to him that, and the HR people said, well, you know, we've never done that. Right. I said, I want you to help me with the house I have to sell in Virginia, not the one that I'm living in. And I want you to treat it as if I'm selling a home and buying a home, not renting or living in base housing. And like I said, they can be a little rigid and sometimes in their policies. It says it, you know, it's in writing, and that's what they do. Um, my boss went to them and said, just do it anyway. I mean, why is that a problem? And I threw in, oh, by the way, for as many military people that we have working here, most of us have homes somewhere, and there's a pretty good chance we're not living in the one that we own, right? So this is kind of a burden, I think, or at least an unfair, or is not necessarily fair to the veterans that you hire who are making the transition, because it's pretty common for us to not buy a home every 3 years, and we may not be in the one that we live in, right? So there is more to negotiate than just salary. Um, you can negotiate things like that, whether it's moving assistance. You know, they moved me, and so I let it eventually go. But I think you can extend the Navy move out to like 7 years. So if you retire and you don't use the Navy to move you, you can just file. I think there's an extension, and you can do a 1 year extension each year. I think out to 7 years. So that, for example, if I came to Gulfstream and 2 years later I went, you know what, I hate Gulfstream, or maybe Gulfstream says we hate this guy, and they tell me it's time for me to go, I'm not now on my own to find a way to move again if I don't have a company that's going to hire me and do it for me. So, um, so beyond just money, there are other things I think that could be negotiated, and for me, that was one of them. So take advantage of that. And I'm going on here a little bit, Biscuit. I'm not sure if I answered your question. Oh, yeah, I guess that's my answer.
And pitfalls.
Pitfalls. You know, so I'm lucky. I'm a lucky guy because I got this job. I wouldn't call it pitfalls. Maybe I'll talk more to, you know, what's different on the outside world. And so what I've learned is that, you know, one, we spend our Navy careers developing our people, training our replacements. We do that everywhere we go, right? Because we know we're going to leave in a few years and somebody's got to take over. Whether you're a skipper and you have an XO who's eventually going to become your CO, or whether you're a lieutenant who's going to eventually become a department head. We do a lot of development of our people. what I found in the outside world is people don't care much about that. They just kind of care about themselves. And so I don't like that. It's just, the leadership styles of people are different. And, in the Navy, especially in command, you expect and you hope that your sailors bring their problems to you and you want to help them. You want to watch them grow professionally. You want to see them do way more than you did. I'd love to see, my JOs be 4-star admirals one day. And if I do, I'll be really proud. That kind of mentality that I think we all have throughout the military doesn't seem to exist too much in the civilian world. And so I don't know if I'd call that a pitfall. It's an aspect of it that I don't really like. I don't lose sleep over it too much, but it's an observation that didn't take me long to figure out, that people don't care so much about that sort of thing. Everybody's kind of, underneath the basket trying to get their own rebound. And they're not going to pass the ball to somebody else hoping that that person makes a 3-pointer. It's just, people are out for themselves a lot of times. Every now and then you'll get a mentor, someone in a very senior position, just like you could in the military, who might pull somebody along with them. And that happens. But not as much as what I think we were used to. Other pitfalls. Taxes. Pay a lot of taxes, a lot more taxes than I ever thought about. I guess that can be a pitfall. So obviously, salary wise, you need to look at where you're going, what kind of state income taxes you've got, kind of property taxes you've got, and that sort of thing. Because ideally, I think if you do it right, you'll get out and you'll make more money than what you made when you were in the service. So that was an eye opener for me, I guess. I never had to stroke a check to the IRS until I got out of the Navy. And now I expect to write them a check every year. And it's just because I keep it small. and I'm not having real good luck right now, but it's getting better. And that's only because I'm not getting rich. I'm making a decent amount of money. But, we moved here recently, a year ago, to this new location, sold 2 houses, capital gains taxes hit me hard. And they'll find you. So, but besides that, I don't expect that kind of thing to happen every year. But this past year was an eye opener for me. What else?
How about the year of your retirement, that tax bill?
If I recall correctly, that was probably the first year. It wasn't a big bill, but when all was said and done, I think I had to write a check that wasn't that big, but I had to give money back because I double dipped, right? I took 2 months of terminal leave. I got my standard Navy pay, and I got paid by Gulfstream, which was more than what I was making in the Navy. And then when I did finally leave the Navy and continue working for Gulfstream, I was making more than I had been. I took out, I didn't take any exemptions. I'm glad you brought this up. So important point, when you do your retirement work with your admin folks, and if you happen to know where you're going, figure out as best you can how much money you need to take out of your retirement for state income taxes if you're going to be in a state that taxes retirement. And so I did that. And if I hadn't done that, then I would have been paying more to the state as well. I kind of came up with a number. I figured out what the state income tax was. And so before I ever left the Navy, I said, yes, take out this much money for the state of Georgia state income tax. Otherwise, I would have had to pay it, real time, which is not a bad thing if you're disciplined enough to not just, spend all that money. If you want to save it and put it in an account that's going to make you a little bit of money before you actually write that check at the end of the year, by all means do it. But I didn't know, I just, I know how much money I'm going to make. Didn't really know what it was going to cost me to live at whatever level I was going to live at, right? There was still some questions. And it took a year or so for me to go, okay, this is how it is. I got it. But there was some unknowns. And so I would say, even if you take a job and they say, here's your salary and it's more than what you're making before you retired, just be aware that there's some tax people waiting on you and some other expenses that you probably hadn't had to deal with. And I would probably not dive in too deep. You know, if you got to buy a house, buy a house. Might want to hold off on that boat for a year or so, just so you can let things settle out. So that's kind of what we did.
So at this point, I'd like to ask Margaret, Nikki, or Marquise if you guys have any questions, because the whole purpose of this fireside chat is to be interactive, and you know, whether that's to Spider or any other TAT members, this is your time.
So this is Margaret Calloway. I did have a question going back with the survivor's benefit. You guys mentioned that you had to declare at the time that you retire, but what about those that aren't married at the time that they retire?
I'm gonna punt that one, Biscuit. I don't know the answer.
This is for survivor benefits?
Yeah,
Yes.
if you're single when you retire, and then you're saying if you subsequently get married maybe after you retire,
Right.
I don't know that answer.
Yeah, that would be.
It
So,
may not apply, right?
yeah,
Part of
without
it
a
is just,
dependent, there's nothing to take out, but
But can
Yeah.
you at some point afterwards,
that specific question
Well,
would
let me
require
take
a
a
little bit
shot
of
at it.
research.
I think that Carl Logan, being a financial guy, might probably have the best answer. But my thought is that just like when you have any other significant life-changing event, there are opportunities to make changes in many of your beneficial areas. But I'm going to yield to Carl, hoping that he's as smart as I think he is. And in most cases, that's usually the case. Carl?
Well, glad you asked that question, and that one is debatable. And I think the answer is no. Unlike that TRICARE and everything else, you can add it later. But once because I was single when I retired and I got married afterwards, I could not add my spouse on afterwards. So, and I don't say that's the rule, but that's what happened for me. And I think that was the case. Like you said before, you can have it and you can stop it. But once you accept those retirement papers and you say no, I don't think you have a chance to go back and change it. But
okay.
that's my
Oh,
opinion.
that's a smart guy. That guy is smarter than the average bear. Boy, I tell you.
yeah, I would
Like-
guess that they kind of look at that as if, hey, you have a spouse, for example, who was there by your side through your military service, and they've kind of earned it. And my guess is that they would kind of look at it as if, okay, so you get married, you know, after your military service. The person you married really had nothing to do with any of that. Wasn't part of your military circle of trust and your family, and that would be my guess, but I don't know that. I've never read that. But
Well,
I think Carl lived
Spider,
it, so
Spider, I'll say this, that's on the benefit side, but it's not free. So even if you buy, you know, it's gonna cost you. So it's
that's
not
right.
that it's gonna cost you one way or the other. So I just think the rule is that they don't, but that'll be, Biscuit, if you find out, let me know, please.
Yeah, I definitely can find out. Margaret, if you can provide us your information, I can, as the survivor benefit expert, that's the company that I work for. I know who to ask that question and we can get an answer.
What is your name again?
Donald Nisbet.
Okay. I'll put
Mhm.
my email in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
But I tell you what, from a transition question, that's probably one of the best questions we've ever had, because that's one of those scenarios where, like you said, you only get one chance to get it right. And if you don't get it right, you're screwed.
Yeah, you missed that bus and it ain't turning around.
And so, Spider, I'll follow up here and I appreciate your comments, and they are, I mean, it's amazing how consistent every speaker has been. And we've had 6, 8, 10 speakers, but the information is consistent. The value of that Rolodex and the value of your former relationship that you've generated in LinkedIn and staying in touch. And I mean, we can't overstate this stuff, but every speaker we have proves how spot on and how valuable those relationships are. And mine is no different than many, in that in the transition process, it was in your case, a test pilot school colleague. In my case, it was a Naval Academy classmate who happened to tell me about a job that was, had come available at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And so we really appreciate your comments, and they're spot on. And I mean, there's nothing magic here. We're just passing along good guidance, good, solid hometown guidance. I'm hoping that people realize it as such, that there's no magic here. If you follow really some very fundamental rules, you can make this transition easier. I won't call it easy, and it's not always easy, but it's easier when you follow good basic guidance. So thanks a lot. Appreciate your time.
Hey, you're welcome. And yeah, it's
Can
how
I
it works
add
out
one
is
other thing?
go
Can I-
go right ahead.
Hi, this is Margaret again. Can I add one other thing? You guys talked about state taxes once you get out at the end of once you retire, and then at the end of the year having IRS and your state taxes bill comes to you. One of the things I found, for each state, there is a form that you may be able to fill out if you have any military disability, or even at a certain age, where you can actually get up to $15,000 credit towards your state income tax. And so one of the things I think people should look at is the state that they're living in, to see if there's any state benefits for income tax at the end of the year as you file your state taxes, because I just stumbled up on it for Maryland, and instead of owing, I got a sizable check back at the end of the year.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. So for example, when I first started at Gulfstream, I lived in Savannah, in the state of Georgia. We moved further north about 25 miles, and now I live in South Carolina. Both of them had state income tax, and they both taxed military retirement. This year, South Carolina said, we're no longer going to tax military retirement, and it went away. So I think your point is a really good point, because it might even influence where you go. You can go somewhere like, I'm from Tennessee. You can go to Tennessee, there is no state income tax. Or you go to Florida, there's no state income tax, right? But chances are there's some other property tax or something that might be a little higher, or whatever it might be, sales tax or something. But I think the point you make is very important, because it's sometimes we see a number on a job offer in terms of salary, and we go, wow, that looks really good. It may not be as good as you think, and so you need to look into all of that. Where am I going to go? What's the tax situation look like there? And all of that sort of stuff. What do I have to pay for medical, if I'm going to pay for medical or dental or vision, right? There's some other expenses that we had the luxury of not having to really deal with too much when we were active duty, and that influences you as well. So I agree with you, and I just got lucky because South Carolina just said we're going to stop.
Yeah, Margaret,
No longer do that.
Stay tuned for Maryland, because when I first retired in 2011, it was 5,000 exempt. They moved it to 15,000 exempt recently, and there's a bill on the books making its way through the state Congress to remove the state income tax for military retirement pay for Maryland, because they have realized that they're losing a lot of folks to South Carolina and to North Carolina, and that they've got all these military people on active duty here, and they're retiring and leaving the state. So
Yeah,
check back often on the changing tax structure for military retirement.
yeah.
I think it's isn't there, once you turn 65, you don't pay state taxes anymore as well?
I don't know that one.
That's how it was here in South Carolina before they just made this new change. It was an age, and I think it was 65, and then you got a significant break. But again, that's how it was, and then they went a step further this year and said, you know what, we're just going to stop taxing retirement, because we have Fort Bragg and Parris Island and Beaufort and all these military bases, and and the same thing, right? People retire and they're like, well, why are you leaving? Because you guys are taking all my money. You're taxing my retirement. You know, I thought I could maybe get by on retirement, maybe a little something else, and you're making it unsustainable. So I'm out. And they want to see that stop too.
Well, and Spider talked about VA disability. Once you get your 100% rating, you no longer pay property tax. And that's when I watched my mortgage cut in half.
That'd be nice.
That's a significant benefit for,
I have that benefit too.
there you go.
Well, I'm at 90. Maybe I need to go back and talk to somebody.
You need to go back
Absolutely.
and talk to somebody. 'cause you do.
Go to DAV
I-
and
I
talk to
got-
somebody.
I'll be honest with you. I was shocked to see 90, to tell you the truth. But, you know, it is what it is.
Well, getting from 90 to 100 is, you got to go in that magic Ouija board. So it's not just getting another 10%. You got to get like another 40 or 50% to get 10 more. It's
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not sure if I can do that.
So let me use my moderator privilege and ask Nikki and Marquise if you guys have any questions. Because again, the purpose of this is to hear from you guys. And as you can see, there's a lot of experience in this channel. And you know, I think the big takeaway is, you know, that network will serve you well decades from now.
Hey, good afternoon. This is Lieutenant Commander Glover, Nikki Glover. No, I just appreciate, listening in. I'm 9 years out from being eligible to retire, but I think just knowing the history or context of the transitioning process and hearing different stories, it allowed me to build my knowledge base for, when I come to that decision point later, when I'm eligible for it. So, no, I just appreciate hearing the story, and I'm tracking the networking piece and the other things that were talked about. So it's good stuff. Thank you.
Hey, you know, something I'll add, I think, that might be worth considering, and maybe somebody else, one of the other folks on here who's, who have retired already, life insurance. You can do it when you're a lieutenant or a JG if you want. And I don't know, I don't really have an answer on when you should do that. When you're young and wearing boots in the military, you feel invincible, right? I don't need no life insurance, but you can do it much. You don't, and you probably shouldn't wait until you get out. And Biscuit, are you raising your hand? Or
Biscuit.
Yeah, shameless plug.
Yeah, go ahead.
Working for a life insurance company. So yeah, I mean, and Carl will tell you the same thing. It only gets more expensive as you get older. And really each person, it's a personal decision, but it's all part of your asset management and looking at your portfolio. And, I would argue that one of the key things before you start your medical is asking yourself, what's going to replace SGLI?
Hey, Biscuit,
Yeah.
can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Ernie.
Okay, I was wondering, I was trying it the other way and I had to put it on my headset. But Spide, I got to tell you, you were one of the only people that mentioned this during the presentation, was the VA rating. And that's something that I think we kind of missed that, because when we retire, we're between 45 and 55 and we're relatively healthy. And we think, I don't need this. This is perfect. I'll do it later. And you brought up the point of the benefits that you receive from doing it right then. And I think we miss out on a lot of that. And I'm the chair of the Veterans Committee, and we just had a meeting on the Veterans Roundup a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about VA rating. And I opened the question to everybody, said, what's your VA rating? And some didn't know. Some were 0, like me. Others were 100%. But it's something that we can do while we're still active duty that's going to have a long-term benefit. You can always change it. As you get older, things are going to happen. They're not going to work. But at least you started that documentation, and there are some benefits that you can receive right there on the spot. So that's a big takeaway for everybody that's on the call right now.
And Ernie, you're spot on. And I was going to mention that to Nikki, that one of my suggestions is, and they It maybe it's different policies, different places. But I never let the hospital transfer my medical record to my next duty station. I did not leave my duty station without having my medical record in my hand. And so I would suggest that you guard that thing like it's gold and hand carry it duty station to duty station, make copies of it at different points in your career, because I've had parts of it lost before, but that was the key to getting the ratings that I got. Was I had all the medical documentation in a medical record that I made copies of that was probably 8.5 inches thick. And I was a relatively healthy guy, but every sprained ankle, every pulled muscle, playing intramurals, I had all those documentations, and that was in service to the Navy. So I was owed that.
Oh,
But
okay, so
remember
I
now,
do,
everything is electronic. So
Yeah.
so now you need to get a disk before you move and transition to the next base, because they have different computer systems from Alta to Genesis, and they're in the transition now. So
Great
as
point.
you transition, make sure you stop by medical records and get your inpatient and outpatient and dental records on a disk. And then the third thing is make sure that all your x-rays are also on a disk.
See,
By the way,
that's-
Dr. Margaret Calloway is going to be one of our speakers on the Veterans Roundup. Doc, you got away earlier, but we're
Oh
coming
my
back for you.
goodness. My ignorance of not knowing it, we had the medical expert there, and that's great advice. That's the difference in you folks in the digital age and us digital immigrants. Y'all were natives, and we were analog. We had to have the hard copy paper.
A hard copy, right?
All right,
That's right.
all right. You guys are getting rowdy.
Hey,
Let's hear from our kids.
Let me add one more thing, Biscuit. So here's something that I thought about though, as I was approaching retirement, right? Because especially for the pilots in the group, right? We spent our whole careers lying to our doctors about how healthy we were.
That's right.
Because the last thing we wanted to do was tell somebody you can't fly because you got this thing going on with your eyesight or something, right? And then we spent the last 6 months of our career telling everybody how unhealthy we were. And somewhere in there, there's a happy median, right? You don't want to be Lieutenant J.G. Smuckatelli and walk in and go, you know what? I really get dizzy all the time when I go flying, right? Because so think about the impact that it might have, and you got to kind of navigate that minefield a little bit. That's kind of what I did. And the person who helped me do that, quite honestly, she said, "This is what you're gonna claim." I worried about, hey, if I do want to fly on the outside, is something that I claim going to impact my ability to get a class 1 physical, for example?
I was going to grade you offline on that one.
Yeah, right. And right, because now since I've retired, I think there was a couple guys for Delta or United, right, who had gotten 100% disability and specifically PTSD. And they lied on their FAA paperwork and said they didn't have any issues. Well, now you got to disclose. If you have disabilities, you've got to disclose that in the world of aviation when you do your medical stuff every year. And they're connected now. Those systems talk to each other. And those guys got fired. And that spread across the industry.
And probably going to have lawsuits against them too.
Yeah, PTSD is not a disqualifying event in most cases, unless they got some seriously severe version of it. But there's some legislation coming out about that.
Yeah. So, but that's what happened to them, right? So I just say, you navigate carefully.
Well, they might have got fired not for having PTSD, but for lying.
Yeah,
lying.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's what they got fired for.
Yeah.
For those that are still on active duty and are young in their career, one of the key things you want to look at is getting long-term care insurance now. Do not wait until you're finish your 20, 30 years in the service, and then you're thinking about, okay, who's going to take care of me when I get old? You buy it now, it's cheap, and you don't miss it.
oh, okay, before I forget, I do have a question. When we're talking about going to medical and getting things documented, I don't recall if I was told that once you retire, you're required to do follow-ups with the VA. Do they like reassess your rating, or if it's while you're still in, that you need to continually get seen for any ailments you might have? Can anyone speak to that?
So when you retire, and you get a rating, if it's a permanent rating, then you don't have any further evaluations until you come and you want to go for adding something else to increase your rating if you haven't gotten to it 100%. And then when you come back to want to increase your rating, they look at your whole packet all over again, and your rating can go up or it can go down. So you got to be careful about that. And so if it's not permanent, if they give you a temporary disability, then up to 5 years, you have to be seen every year for an assessment.
So is there anything you should do while you're still active duty to, I guess, prepare for that?
So if you have an issue going on while you're on active duty and you're going to be going through the med board process, IDES process, a lot of that will actually provide you with your rating before you even get to that 5-year period. And then if you are within the retirement time frame, I think within 3 years of retirement, then you'll probably be referred for permanent when you get to your 20 years. But if you're not within that retirement time frame, then you may have that 5 years of having to have continual reassessments to see if the condition that you're dealing with, say it's something that thyroid cancer, and then after 3 years you're stable and you're going on, they may want to reassess that before they give you a final permanent disability, because that could go one way as a severe disability, or it could be just something that you just stay on medication for the rest of your life, and it may not be rated as high.
Yeah, Nikki, no one will ever ask you to participate in any fraudulent behavior in the process of getting your rating, but make sure your accurate medical scenario is documented in your record so that when it's time to be evaluated, you get accurately evaluated. And there's not some visits missing or whatever else. You just, while you're on active duty, make sure you document all those things that should be in your medical record, because you can't go back 5 years later and put them in there.
And make sure when you do your final physical that the things that you have documented are actually physically and written on your DD2, 1351.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll reiterate, like I said before, about get help from somebody who knows this process, because I mean, the lady that helped me brought things out that I'm like, you know what, I could have racked my brain. I never would have even remembered that thing from when I was a Lieutenant JG. I tore a meniscus in my knee. I remember that. I was the commander at the time. That wasn't that long ago. My knee still hurts. And the other thing that I found surprising was that, it doesn't always have to be a serious affliction, if you will. Most of what I got for disability was range of motion, pain in my shoulders. I used to lift a lot of heavy weights. I just figured, well, this is just what happens when you get old. All those things counted and came into play. And so don't, consider everything. Some things that you probably don't expect to be noteworthy, they're probably noteworthy. And people who are in the business of doing this sort of stuff, they understand that, and they'll pull that stuff out. So don't be shy about getting help.
Copy. Thank you, sir.
Great points. Great points, Spider.
Okay, so we're right at the hour mark. Mr. Jackson, I want to give you an opportunity. Otherwise, I know this group will stay on for another hour. Okay, nothing heard.
Bishop, we may want to mention this was really an outstanding fireside chat. And for any of the newcomers,
25 October.
Recommend going to the let's see, NNOA/. nnoa.org/transition webpage, and you will see recordings of some of our previous Fireside Chat speakers. And there's, again, you'll see some common themes throughout all of them, but additional points can be had and heard if you were to look at those recordings too.
And thanks for bringing that up, Captain Francis. The next fireside will be held on 25 October, Tuesday, at the same time. So look for that invitation and go ahead and forward it to your friends, because again, the purpose of this group is to get that word out, so that more people are made aware and have resources when they're in their time of need, because it's stressful enough transitioning. And I haven't celebrated my 1-year anniversary yet of retirement, and it took a good 6 months for everything to kind of settle out. And it wasn't possible without the help of many people in this group and then other resources. So Spider, I want to thank you for taking the time out today. And you're always welcome to join the group. We're just looking for new members. But you talked about purpose, and honestly, that's one reason why I joined this group, is because of that purpose and the ability to continue to serve from the other side.
All right. Well, thanks for reaching out to me. I appreciate you letting that money that I owe you slide if I did this. That's a joke.
Yeah. Captain Barnes, did you want to say anything to close us out?
No, I just want to once again thank you, Spider. You're still the man. I remember a while back when I was in recruiting command, I reached out to you to support us, and you never know how to say no. So really appreciate you supporting the TAT, and your words are spot on. I'm sure everybody in the TAT appreciated it. And I want to close out with, once again, going back to the remark I made earlier. We have resources here. We got, guys like Carl Logan is a subject matter expert in the area of dollars and cents. And so you talked about how important it is to get your money right when you transition, because it's the kind of money that you probably haven't seen before, and you don't want to lose that opportunity. So we appreciate your comments. Thank you for coming. Biscuit invited you to be a member of the TAT, and I'm going to double down on that. So we appreciate you.
I think I expect like a name tag or something in the mail the next day or two. I feel like I've already been sucked into this.
Well, the coffee cups are on order.
All right.
The good news is
Spider with an I, not a Y.
The good news is it won't increase your tax burden.
That's terrible.
All right, guys. Thanks everyone. Let's see. For the members, I'll put out a email for the next meeting. But Hewlin, your brother's on the hook.
Okay.
For the next speaker.
Oh, Bruce. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
All right, guys.
All
Awesome.
right.
All right, thanks.
Food.
One part.
Nice. Great job. Great job.
Appreciate
Enjoyed it. Appreciate it. Have a
All
good
right.
evening, everyone.
All right.